Hello, my name is Shannon Casperson, and I am a pre-award specialist in the Office of the Associate Dean of Research in the College of Veterinary Medicine. Whether you are new to submitting a USDA AFRI proposal, or you've applied several times in the past, the indirect cost rate method the USDA requires can get a little confusing and messy. This tutorial will walk you through how to use the budget template provided to you by your pre-award specialist so that you can correctly calculate the indirect cost for your budget. One thing to note before we get started. Throughout the tutorial, you will hear me refer to indirect costs as something called F&A. F&A and indirect costs are the same thing, so you will hear me refer to the terms and use them interchangeably. The USDA requires that we use an indirect cost rate of 30% total federal funds, which is equivalent to 42.857 total direct costs, or use our institutionally negotiated indirect cost rate, whichever produces the lower amount of F&A. As you may know, the U of M's negotiated rate for research is 55% modified total direct costs. This means that every budget we develop for a USDA AFRI proposal, we must calculate indirect costs under both methods, 55% modified total direct costs and 30% total federal funds. Once we do those calculations, we determine which one produces the lower amount of F&A, and that is the amount that gets incorporated into your overall proposal budget. So let's start with an example of a budget that does not include subawards. Here you can see we're using a pretty basic budget, a 4-year. We've got PI, some co-Is, a grad student with some corresponding tuition. We've got some equipment in year 1, some other basic expenses like travel, publication. Probably pretty used to seeing this. You will see in our budget template that we do both the modified total direct cost calculation and the USDA calculation that we're required to do. If you look at rows 66 through 68, you will see that this is where we start to do the modified total direct cost calculation. These cells are performing this calculation based off a couple of formulas that are running in the background. The first thing we do is we calculate what's called a modified total direct cost base. So we're taking the total direct costs and we're subtracting out the things that are exclusions to F&A under the modified total direct cost method. The two things in this budget that we have that are excluded from F&A are tuition and the equipment. So once we exclude those from the costs, we got our new base that we are allowed to take the 55% indirect costs on. So you'll see this cell is calculating 55% of the new base to produce the amount of F&A that we're allowed to request in year 1 under the modified total direct cost calculation method. Cells 70 and 71, however, are doing the USDA total federal funds calculation. Now remember, 30% total federal funds is equivalent to 42.857 total direct costs. For the purpose of the budget template, we use the total direct cost calculation because it's simpler math. So you'll see here in this cell, we're taking our total direct costs, timesing it by the 42.857% to get the amount of F&A that we would be allowed to request in year 1 if we were using the USDA's method. The budget template is designed and set up that it will highlight the cells in green that produce the lower amount of F&A. So in this scenario, we can see that we have requested a lower amount of F&A using the USDA calculation versus the modified total direct cost calculation. This means that we will need to use the USDA's rate for this proposal budget. The next step that a person would use is they would then take whatever is highlighted in green and they would insert it in row 63. So this will be the job of you, the PI or the researcher. You will have to take a look below at what the template has produced for you. And whichever one highlights in green, you'll want to make sure that you enter here on top. That is how you will know which F&A rate to use and which one you can incorporate into your budget when you're doing your planning. A good rule of thumb is that the more things you have to exclude from F&A, like equipment, tuition, and subawards, the higher the chance you run of the modified total direct cost calculation producing the lower amount of F&A. If you think about it, the more things you exclude, the lower your indirect cost base will be, and then the lower the indirect costs in general will be. However, if you're only excluding a few things, like tuition or maybe a single piece of equipment that's pretty inexpensive in year 1, you have a good chance of the USDA's total federal funds rate being the method that produces the lower indirect costs for your budget.